Hello, everyone. It is Wednesday evening, 8:30 p.m., November 18th. Hope you're doing well. I have a few, I think, pretty notable announcements for you, mostly just some changes in timeline of when things are going to be happening throughout the few remaining weeks of the semester. I think these changes will be to your benefit. Oh, I'm noticing a typo here. Please disregard that. Whatever the case may be, let me just go through this list here, and I'll send out an email as well. But please pay attention to these announcement slides as well as the emails, because that's the primary way that I'll be disseminating this type of information. Today I'm going to cover a little bit more about plants. There's a couple more things I want to say that I think are locally relevant to us here in Bakersfield, in California specifically. And then we're going to go over really broadly looking at animal biology, zoology, but generally the animal biology is more apt these days in terms of a description. And then on Monday, November 23rd, we will cover biome ecology. Then Wednesday the 25th, there will be no class, no recording. That's because it's Thanksgiving. Have a happy holiday, stay safe. When we're on the other end of Thanksgiving break, on Monday, November 30th, we're going to cover threats to biodiversity and bioethics, which will be the last, that'll be the tie-off for the class. And so that puts us into Wednesday, December 2nd of that same week. We're going to have a live final review session using the same modality, the same setup as we've done for the past few review sessions. And so I'll probably be sending out a Google poll, and I highly recommend that you make time, probably sometime in the evening, but it probably could be sometime during the day after 2 p.m. on Wednesday, December 2nd. So please keep an eye out for a poll that I'd like you to take regarding that. And then you'll have a week basically to study. So the final exam will be released at 12 a.m. on December 9th, so first thing in the morning, and you'll have all day. So from 12 a.m. on December 9th to 11:59 p.m. on Canvas. It's going to be the exact same type of modality for exams as taken so far. I'd wager that the exam would probably take you to about an hour and a half to 2 hours. It's a little bit longer than a typical unit exam, but also much more broad and focused, not as specific. So you'll have all day again, but a relatively it won't take you 24 hours to do it. However, if you start at 11 o'clock at night, and I just don't recommend that. And if this is hard, this is a hard date. Unless you have some kind of accommodation. If you try to do it at 12:01 a.m., that's just Canvas won't accept it, and this is the date that the time for the final is set in stone. So please put that on your calendars. December 9th, you'll have all day on Canvas. A few other items for you to be aware of. First of all, is that there is an extra credit assignment now available on Canvas that's going to be due Monday, November 30th. So it's the same day we'll be covering threats to biodiversity and bioethics. So that is an assignment which I've basically asked you to look at the Tejon Conservancy website and look at the species lists there and pick one species from all the 5 major groupings. So plants, animals, insects, birds, and herpetofauna, which are things like frogs and newts and snakes and things like that. Pick one species from each of those 5 categories, and for each of those species, spend a few paragraphs summarizing what that species is, And then pick a peer-reviewed journal article that you can find just by doing a Google Scholar search. And I've provided the link that you can use to get to Google Scholar on the description document there on the assignment on Canvas. And then I'd like you to include a picture of the organism as well. And that can also be simply from Google. So keep in mind, I'd like that to be due November 30th. It's due, I think it's worth about 30 points, so, or 35 points, so pretty close to half an exam grade, basically half an exam grade. So I strongly recommend you do that if you feel like you benefit. Of course, not required. Extra credit assignments are not required. So the way that I'm going to do this is you'll notice it is set up as a it doesn't have any point value attached to it if you look at it. And the reason why is that if you don't do it, it would actually count against you. It shows a 0 in your grade book, which I don't want anyone to be concerned by that. So instead, I'm going to take those 35 points and I'm going to allocate them across the past 3 exams. I'll just add those points up to a total. And so it'll add up to a total of 35. But again, this is so you won't see it it shows as a 0 on the grade book, but it will still those points will still be attributed to you in a different way. So consider doing that. I really enjoy reading these. I've had students do this kind of project in the past, and so that's due Monday, November 30th. Likewise, that same week, your book reports are due on Wednesday, December 2nd. That's another pretty substantial assignment that you've had all semester to do. So this is a pretty bigger, 10-page assignment, bigger assignment, that's for sure. I am available to answer any questions. This is intended to be kind of a broader assignment that's up to your discretion on where you want to take it. You're reading a book, and I certainly do not want to see kind of a sterile summary of the book. I really would like you to be exploring your own ideas and thoughts about the book in question. So for example, one person I was speaking to, it was interested, was reading a book on sleep, and they were interested on how melatonin tablets, I believe, can help you maintain healthy sleep patterns if you're struggling with apnea. And they wanted to write their book report specifically on melatonin. And so I highly recommend that if there's something about your book that you really feel passionate about, write your book report on that one subject, kind of using the book as your filter, but it does not need to be kind of a whole kind of summary of the book. I would like it to be kind of a more of a reflection of kind of where the highlights were for you, so that it's something you're passionate about, something that you enjoy writing about, because the book choice was up to you. Even within that book, I want you to pick kind of a specific thing that you really enjoyed about it and write about that, because that way you'll enjoy writing it and I'll enjoy reading it. What I look for in the book report, I stipulated 10 double-spaced pages. A couple of those can be pictures, but a couple of you can account for a couple pages of pictures and things like that if you feel so inclined. So at least 8 pages of text. But within that 8 pages, I certainly am not looking for kind of a sterile summary of the report, of the book. And also, I'd prefer you stay away from long stretches of just quoting the book as well. Short stuff like less than a sentence. If it helps to make your point, that's fine. Really, what I'm looking for in the book report, everyone, is not that you describe the biology of the book in a perfect sense like a biologist would, but that and this is pretty overt, when you read someone else's work, you can tell whether or not they tried or whether or not they did it at the last minute. If I am reading your book and it's obvious that you made a very concerted effort, I'm not going to split hairs. I'm going to give you a good grade. But if it's something that you obviously slap together at the last minute, I'm going to be less inclined to give you a good grade. So 10 pages double spaced, 5 pages single spaced, if you want to think of it that way, with a couple of pages for pictures, if you feel so inclined. Again, not required. So that's the kind of the broad format. The specific types of things that you want to talk about are up to you, but I really would prefer it to be, again, something that you are interested in within the confines of your book, relating it back to the wider field of biology along the lines of the subjects we've been talking about all semester. So please let me know if you have any questions. I know that's broadly up to your interpretation. I assume you've been reading the books throughout the whole semester. I've been in contact with a number of you with questions. You know, maybe you're already done, in which case you can already submit it. It's up to you, and this can be off your plate. Other than that, it will be due in a couple of weeks, Wednesday, December 2nd. That's a pretty substantial number of points. So I definitely recommend that you put some serious effort into that. And then one more thing. You'll notice in the syllabus this week there was going to be a Today I'm a Botanist lab, and then next week there was going to be a Today I'm a Zoologist lab, and then there was going to be one more lab called Today I'm a Biologist Part 2. I just kind of, you know, considering that you've got the Tohon Species Report, you may decide to do that, the book report, that we've got Thanksgiving and you've got other things going on. I decided to ease it up a little bit, and I'm just going to make one more lab due. That's the Today I'm a Biologist Part 2 lab, but I'm going to make it a 40-pointer lab. So it's going to be kind of a synthesis, the very last lab of the class, kind of synthesizing of things that you've looked at throughout the whole class, including what we're talking about in this unit. So that's going to be due December 2nd, along with the entire lab manual that you've been doing. So I'd like you to make a single PDF scan of everything that you've done, every single lab, from the table of contents all the way to this particular lab, the Today I'm a Biologist Part 2. I'd like you to make a single scan using, you know, a scanner or the My Adobe Scan app on your phone. I really do not want JPEG pictures with with a bunch of different files. I want one single file and submitted back to Canvas, and then the Today I'm a Biologist lab will be you can just make that as the last page of your file. So that's going to be due in a couple weeks as well. So those are the 3 big things that you have coming up. You have 2 weeks, you know, coming, you know, so you've still got plenty of time. And I hope that these slight rearrangements of the syllabus schedule will give you some breathing room to feel comfortable about your timeline for all this. So please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions. You know, as you can imagine, at this point in the semester, I know you're in other classes as well, things are moving pretty quickly at this point. So I recommend that you don't wait to do things in the last minute, and to reach out if you have any questions. I've had some great conversations with some of you with questions, and you know, so I think that that's been helpful, and you're in a better track now. If you are in any way concerned, please reach out to me. Email me. You know, I can help, but you gotta ask for it. So that being said, let's just go ahead and dive in to the second little bit about plants that I want to talk about, plant diversity. So I just want to hone in specifically on where we live. I am assuming, I know there's a couple folks who do not live in California in the class, but most of us live in California. Most of us yet still live either in Bakersfield or in one of the outlying towns, Shafter, Delano. So we're all kind of in the San Joaquin Valley, right? I want to brag a little bit about where we live, if I can take a moment to do that. If we hone in specifically on California, it is the most botanically diverse state in the entire country. Okay, So there's 2,000 species of plants that are endemic to California, meaning that they don't occur anywhere else in the whole world. Okay, you won't find them anywhere else. They're completely unique to our state, which is pretty amazing. That's a higher rate of endemism than any other state in the country, even Hawaii, which has pretty high rates of endemism as well. And coinciding with that, a 2,000 number of endemic plants, completely unique plants, there are a heck of a lot of plant life history strategies. Remember life histories, which was that ecological term we discussed way back in Unit 1, which is kind of the broad suite of ecological traits that affect an organism's performance in the ecosystem that it finds itself. So its rate of reproduction, its rate of growth, all of those things combined is what constitutes an organism's life history strategy. We also talked about this in the context of R versus K selected species, remember? I just want to briefly explore life history strategies in California. And the first thing that we have to talk about, if we're going to talk about life history strategies in California, is to emphasize that here in California, we have a really weird climate. We're kind of used to it probably. We're in the month of December right now, right? Or November, excuse me. We're in the month of November. What are we experiencing right here, right now in California? Well, the weather, thank goodness, is much cooler than it was 2 months ago. We've already gotten a little bit of rain. Pretty soon in the next couple of months, the hills around our valley are going to explode into green, and those browns are going to disappear, and it's going to be, it's going to look like Ireland, right? Pretty quickly. That's kind of an unusual climate if we consider that related to most of the rest of the world, which has either a temperate climate or a tropical climate, which are broadly associated either with year-round patterns of rainfall or patterns of rainfall that are more in the summer. We have a Mediterranean type climate here in California, which broadly means we have hot, dry summers that have a proclivity toward drought, but then we have short, cool, wet winters. And that combination of cool, wet winters and hot, dry summers is pretty unique, globally speaking. So we have it here in California. Of course, the namesake, the Mediterranean Basin, has a Mediterranean type climate. The central Chile region on the coast, on the west coast of South America, it turns out has a Mediterranean climate. The Cape Cod region is South Africa, and the southwest and south coast of Australia. So these areas highlighted here in red, these are the areas around the world that have Mediterranean type climate. And because it's so rare, globally speaking, you get life history strategies, not just in plants, but in animals and microbes and all other taxa as well, that are pretty unique. That don't really. Oh.
Can I have water?
Oh, yes. Yes.
It's okay.
Yes, take it. Thank you. Sorry, my son wanted to drink the water. So anyway, back to Mediterranean type climates, hot, dry summers, cool, moist winters, which are relatively rare, globally speaking. And that rarity influences the life history strategies that we see. And so just if you look at these areas in red, even though they're like less than 1% of the world's landmass, they account for pretty close to 20% of all plant taxa, for example, which is almost on par with the tropics, even though the tropics have way more landmass in comparison. So these are what are called biodiversity hotspots, where there's just high rates of species that don't occur in these Mediterranean type climate zones relative to other areas in the world. And California is no exception. We live in a really amazing place, it turns out. And case in point, right here, our local jewel, Tejon Ranch, as you've heard me talk about on more than one occasion. Tejon Ranch, if you think about California being the most botanically diverse state in the country, Tejon Ranch is arguably the most botanically diverse place. It's one of the most botanically diverse properties in the state. So it's really kind of ground zero for botanical diversity anywhere in the country. You know, you can make the case. You know, some people might disagree, but I think that it's definitely a contender. We live in one of the coolest places, everyone, for folks living here at the south end of the San Joaquin. If you live in Bakersfield or Arvin or Lamont or Shafter or Delano, you're within driving distance of this amazing property with huge rates of botanical diversity that are on par with the tropics, like the rainforests. So you don't need to get that far to get to have a safari. That's the case I'm trying to make. And the reason why, and I think I've discussed it in some detail already in other aspects of the course, the reason why Tejon Ranch is so diverse is because of the different ecological regions that kind of combine together here in the heart of the ranch. So that's color coded here in this particular map. The southern spine of the Sierra comes down here in green. So the terminus is right here, basically at Grapevine Canyon, which you've driven up. You know, see the outlets here. You're looking basically at the southern spine of the Sierra Nevada mountain range. And so up here on the higher elevations here of these various ridges, you pick up a very Sierran feeling. You get things like white fir and incense cedar and pinyon pine. And if you very much feel like you're in the mountains when you're at the higher elevations of Tejon Ranch, which is pushing 6,000 feet in elevation. So that's it's montane. That's definitely the case. But just downslope, you know, as you know, you could throw a rock down this ridge and you could hit the Mojave Desert. So you're standing in a white fir forest, but then you're looking down this ridge, looking south, and you're looking at the northwest extent of the Mojave Desert. And so, you know, as the bird flies, not far at all, and yet it's a completely different ecoregion. And so you pick up things like Joshua Tree, for example, which if you've ever driven out toward Las Vegas, you hit Joshua Tree. And then right here, color coded in gray, the transverse range, the coastal ranges. So things like Chaparral, Hollywood, which is the namesake, of course, for Hollywood, the movie industry. That's all named after a specific plant that is found in the coastal areas. But if you've ever been over on the coast and you see that kind of low-lying grayish greenish shrubbery that's native, like if you've ever been to Montaña de Oro State Park, for example, or Morro Bay, that is all coastal vegetation, and that influence extends clear all the way over here, that coastal influence basically to Tejon Ranch. And so you get an influence over here that is somewhat coastal in feeling. Coastal sage scrub is kind of what the botanical treatment that this is called. And then last but not least is our great Central Valley. The San Joaquin Desert is the terminus of that. And so even though it's in a very heavily altered state from what it would have looked like historically, the San Joaquin Desert has its own suite of native vegetation and wildlife species, which are really awesome. And you pick up that influence here as well in these hills here on Tejon Ranch. And so these four ecoregions, the San Joaquin Desert, the Sierra Nevada, the Mojave Desert, the transverse ranges, the coastal influence, they all smash together right here in the heart of Tejon Ranch. And you pick up just amazing botanical diversity as well as wildlife diversity as well. So here in the San Joaquin, we get this things like valley oak woodlands, which is the largest oak in the lower 48 by canopy volume. A very rare vegetation type. You can see a lot of this up toward Visalia, but also here on Tejon Ranch, a very beautiful oak species. Used to be far more common than it is today, but this is what the San Joaquin Valley foothills looked like for the most part. You still have some remnant patches, but this was far more common, used to be. Then you get things like saltbush shrublands, which, believe it or not, is our native upland vegetation. So if you where your house is if you live in the San Joaquin Desert, where your house is today, probably 200, 300 years ago, looked like this. These salty areas that had interspersed annual plants as well. So that's what I actually did my thesis on. So salt bushes are pretty awesome. I love salt bushes. if you get up into the upper elevations of Tejon Ranch, very much feels like you're in the mountains. So huge conifer trees, white firs, incense cedars, very much feels like you're in the mountains. Here, the coastal influence, so that coastal sage scrub, chaparral, kind of almost looks like Hollywood. You get, really diverse taxa that are really cool in here. And then in the Mojave Desert, you get things like Joshua trees. So all of these different ecological, these are all pictures from Tejon Ranch, by the way. You can get all of these different ecosystems. You can drive to them within 2 hours. If you take if you drive a cross section of Tejon Ranch, you can start in Joshua Tree Woodlands. Half an hour later, you can be in pine forests. Half an hour later, you can be 10 minutes later, you can be in chaparral shrublands. 20 minutes after that, you can be in saltbush shrublands. 20 minutes after that, you can be in valley oak woodland. Within 2 hours, you can sample all of these different ecoregions, and the botanical diversity as well as the wildlife diversity that inhabit these different ecoregions is just off the charts. Tejon Ranch is a really awesome place, and it is right here in San Joaquin. So I hope maybe, it's just so you know, we have a local point of pride that is definitely underrated. So, kind of branching a little bit away from Tejon Ranch specifically and kind of broadening our horizon back to California, we have some awesome plants here in California. Just so happens that we have the biggest, the tallest, and the oldest organisms, which all happen to be plants, in the world, right here in the Golden State. And so, let's just talk about what they are. The biggest organism in the world, and this is in terms of volume, that is, maybe you've been to it before. It's the General Sherman tree, which you can go see in Sequoia National Park. It's up by Visalia. If you drive past Visalia and work your way northeast up into the Sequoia National Park, these are the giant sequoias. The largest by canopy volume, or at least trunk volume, of course, is General Sherman. So this is a person standing against the trunk of General Sherman. 1,487 cubic meters. So it's by far the largest single organism in the world. Sequoiadendron giganteum. So you can go do this in a day trip from Bakersfield, y'all. You can get there and back in a day, and you can see the largest organism in the world. It is awesome. Probably one of the largest organisms that has ever lived. It is amazing, and we are privileged to be so close to it. People travel from all over the world to see General Sherman, and we can do it in a day trip. We're privileged. I'm trying to highlight this. The tallest tree in the world is a coast redwood up in the Redwood National Park north of San Francisco. So think of like Endor and Star Wars, where that was filmed. It's called the Hyperion tree. It's 115 meters tall. This is not the Hyperion tree in this picture. It's kind of an artist's rendition. In fact, the exact location of the Hyperion tree is a closely guarded secret. Unlike the General Sherman tree, which is not a secret, you can go see it anytime. But the reason why a Hyperion tree is a secret is that it's in a very remote area, and if people knew where it was, there are jerks in the world who would probably go cut it down with chainsaws. And so they have to keep it a secret. So it's, you'll notice it's in the same exact family as the General Sherman, Sequoiadendron and Sequoia sempervirens. Do you see the similarity in their scientific names? They're in the same family. So it's a family resemblance, but this happens to be the tallest organism in the world. A little far for a day trip here in Bakersfield, but certainly something you can go do with, like in a weekend. You drive up past San Francisco along the I-5, and you probably could do it in a day, although it probably may not. It's a weekend activity to go, and I recommend if you've never been to the Redwood National Park, I totally recommend it. It's beautiful, just beautiful. And lastly, the oldest organism in the world, bristlecone pine. Maybe you've heard of it, called the Methuselah tree. Also a pine tree. So we're all three of these, the largest, the tallest, and the oldest, are all gymnosperms, cone-bearing plants. So the Methuselah tree is almost 5,000 years old. And you can get to Methuselah by Right, here in Bakersfield, take the 58 over to Tehachapi, hop down on the Mojave, and work your way up the 14 and the 385 until you get to the Inyo National Forest in the White Mountains. And there's a visitor center there, and you can go see the bristlecone pines. Similar to Hyperion, which is the tallest, the Methuselah tree, which is the single. There's a number of bristlecone pines, but the Methuselah tree is a closely guarded secret as well. Relatively few people know exactly which one it is. The reason why is that there are jerks in the world who would probably go cut it down given the opportunity, so they keep it a secret. If people knew what the Methuselah tree was, which one it was. But it looks something like this. This may be it, maybe not, I don't know. But you'll notice not very big. I mean, these are only a few meters tall, and maybe 2 or 3 meters in diameter. But the oldest organisms in the world. I mean, ancient Egypt old. So that's these were probably little seedlings at the time of ancient Egypt, which is amazing to think about, right? Very ancient organisms. So I just wanted to emphasize those 3 organisms to you because you can go see them here relatively easily. And so just kind of getting back to plant diversity, we'll talk a little bit about plant ecology. Of course, we've talked about ecology at great length already, which is the study of the house, how organisms relate to the environment. And we've also talked about life history strategies. So our selected species, things that reproduce fit quickly and grow quickly, along this continuum to things like K-selected species, which reproduce slowly and grow slowly. The Methuselah tree, for example, is definitely a K-selected species. And so plants have a heck of a lot of life history strategies, but let's just ask some questions. If we want to think about which life history strategy is the best to consider for an individual plant, are plants that are bigger better? Are plants that live a long time better versus plants that don't live a long time? Are plants that never go dormant better to plants that do have to go dormant, like lose their leaves? Are plants that grow quickly better relative to plants that don't grow quickly? Are plants that make a ton of seed relative to plants that don't make a ton of seed? Are those better? Are plants that have large seeds better than plants that make small seeds? Are plants that always make seeds rather than seasonally? Are plants that respond well to change? Are those better than the ones that are sensitive to change? What's the ideal plant? What's your opinion on that? Well, is there such a thing as an ideal plant? This is the point where if we were in a classroom together, I would be strongly raising my eyebrows right now and saying, no, there is no such thing as an ideal plant because there are so many different life history strategies that plants occupy. For example, this is called the Grimes triangular model. Grimes was a botanist who came out with this 3-pronged hypothesis of different life history strategies that plants can belong to. Plants can either be competitors, where they compete very strongly, or they can be stress tolerators, or they can be disturbance tolerators. And these are kind of thought of in terms of ecological trade-offs. So as you become more competitive, you become less tolerant to stress. As you become more disturbance, as you become more tolerant of disturbance, you become less competitive. And as you become more tolerant of stress, you become less tolerant of disturbance. This is kind of just a broad synopsis of the different types of life history strategies that plants can occupy. Again, kind of like the R versus K continuum, it is a continuum. It's not something that's categorical. In fact, this particular model, it has some holes in it that people have since pointed out. It's not all encompassing, but it is still nevertheless a pretty useful thing to consider in the context of plant life history strategies. So let's just really quickly explore some different life history strategies that plants use in different types of environments, from things like deserts to alpine environments or places where there's a lot of fire, and finally salty places, which are my favorite. So desert plants, what are the broad life history strategies that plants that live in deserts have to employ? Well, as you can imagine, plants that are living in deserts, what's their limiting resource? Water. And so water conservation is the absolute key for plants that are living in very dry environments. And so plants have adopted a number of different physiological and morphological mechanisms to tolerate an extreme absence of water, aka drought. So for example, plants can do things like thicken their leaves, heavily lignify their leaves so that they do not lose water at as steady a rate as leaves that are thinner. So that's kind of related to water efficiency in a way. But they basically have thick leaves that are leathery to the feel, and their stomates, which are the pores on the surface of the leaves, are really stingy. They don't let out a lot of water. So that's one way. They control their leaves and the amount of water they let out of their leaves. They also have things like leaf hairs, which helps reflect sunlight, for example, back away. So it keeps the leaves cool. That reduces the amount of water they need. They reduce predation on their leaves because they don't want to lose water by spines and chemical defenses. So think of things like cacti that don't want to be chomped on, so they protect themselves. They have deep roots. So look at this particular diagram here on the bottom. They access water here deep in the water column, and because they are able to get water, the soil column rather, because they're able to have access to water that's pretty deep down, they are able to survive. They have the unique photosynthetic mechanisms, which I won't go into detail here, but are really good at producing the sugars they need without a huge water cost. And then they do things like go dormant at certain times of the year, and they tend to grow really slowly. All of these different mechanisms are broadly designed, namely, to conserve water. Plants that live in alpine and Arctic conditions, they have a different set of conditions. This is interesting. You'll notice some similar, you'll notice some different, some similar strategies, but to deal with different conditions. So they also have small leaves and things like leaf hairs, but what's the limiting environment for Arctic and alpine plants? Well, generally speaking, not so much water. Their main goal is thermoregulation. They want to be able to maintain their temperatures in their vascular system so they don't freeze to death. So things like having small leaves and leaf hairs, in this case, leaf hairs actually help keep the leaves warmer. They do things like grow in dense mats. So think of like kind of all clustering together to keep warm. They have compounds in their sap that help them avoid freezing. They also go dormant, and they also have a slow growth, and they live a long time. Those are the broad life history strategies of plants that live in really cold environments. Plants that, really interestingly, here in California, of course, we have a fire history. And fire history is nothing new. It's something that is a natural part of ecosystem processes, although it has been altered by human activities. Plants that grow in fire-adapted areas are called pyrophytes. And so these are literally things that have an affinity toward fire. And so plants, that are adapted to live in these conditions, interestingly, they depend on fire. We often think of fire as a bad thing, but for plants that are pyrophytic, they actually, a lot of them need fire in order to fuel their life histories. They require fire to have kids. Their seeds actually physically, chemically require fire. They need to be burned. But in order to persist in the aftermath of fire, so that their young can germinate or they can resprout, they have to have thick bark, fewer lower branches. Their seed bank is actually cued to germinate. So like if a fire burns through, the chemicals that are in like the ash, when rains come, those smoky, ashy chemicals percolate down into the soil, and those seeds that are in there in the soil are actually activated by the smoke chemicals, which is pretty awesome. They've done studies to demonstrate this. And some are annuals as well, so they don't really mind being burned up. So that's pretty cool. And then finally, salt-adapted plants, which are called halophytes, which are my absolute favorite. That's what I did my master's work on. It's what I will probably be doing my PhD work on. Salty environments are likewise a pretty stressful life. It's stressful to live in salty areas, and so these things that it messes with their water transport. So they do things like have small leaves, and they do things that kind of compartmentalize salt out of the way so that they don't have to deal with it. So they accumulate salt in their vacuoles. Vacuoles, you'll remember, are an organelle that are specific to plants. Others just exclude salt. So I'll just point to this one right here, salt bushes, which is our native upland vegetation. It is really good at living in salty areas. Okay, so that's just all I wanted to say about plants. I wasn't quite done talking about them, it turns out. So let's just really quickly study the animals native to our region as an intro to animal biology. So now again, I'll pick examples from Tejon Ranch because I can, and because there are really good examples on Tejon Ranch, and it's something that you could probably see. These are the animals native to our region. So just to remember the Linnaean classification, we're talking about animals here, which are certainly eukaryotes. And so think about the eukaryotic processes we've been talking so far. Animals, as distinct from plants, most plants, all animals are heterotrophs, meaning that they do not have the ability to make their own food through the process of photosynthesis. Some plants are heterotrophs as well, as we learned last time, but all animals are heterotrophs, meaning that they derive their food from a lot of different sources, generally by consuming the organic compounds in other organisms. And so there's a lot of different ecological adaptations. The primary driver of animal diversity, unlike plant diversity, is the different adaptations that animals have come up with to manage their heterotrophy. And so there's a lot in the ecological adaptations of animals are a lot more complex along those lines relative to plants. So let's just quickly run through some examples of common adaptations to heterotrophs, not necessarily exclusive or exhaustive, but these are just some main ones. So animals that are heterotrophs, they have to be able to acquire and digest their own food. Obviously, they can't make their own. They have to be able to maintain their body temperature. So I think there's different strategies for that we'll talk about. They have to be able to maintain their water balance, which we'll talk about. And then they also have to maintain, kind of behavior, as distinct from plants. They have to maintain distinct patterns of either diurnal or nocturnal and responding to seasonal changes through time. So it's a little bit more intricate than plants in that way, although plants fit into these categories as well. I'm going to skip over this because I don't know why this slide is in here. So first of all, animals have to be able to acquire and digest food because they can't make any of their own. And the easiest way to think about this in the context of animals is just to look at their mouth parts. So in this specific picture right here, mosquito has a long proboscis, obviously to insert into a blood vessel of some kind of host organism. So they're parasites. And its mechanism of heterotrophy is sucking blood, and it has a pretty unique mouth appendage to do that. If you look at grasshoppers, their mouth appendages have all these little feelers and grabbers, and if you're able to look underneath, kind of like pincer-like organism, or structures underneath, broadly designed to manipulate grass blades and eat them. And so it's very, very specific on eating grass. Things like cardinals have long pointed beaks that are really good at like pecking into wood and getting small insects that live in wood and under soil and things like that. So it's very specific. Flamingos have a very interesting beak design where they stick their heads into the water and they shake it about, and they've got these grooves on the inside of their beaks that enable them to filter out little crustaceans and things that they eat directly. Things like hawks are very much designed, their mouth parts are designed for eating prey quickly on the go, so like small lizards and small mammals. Things like grazers look at their teeth, are very much designed for kind of grinding on things. And then carnivores have very sharp, pointy teeth. They're designed to kill and then also to eat. And so all of these, the best way to think about heterotrophy in the context of acquiring and digesting food is just to look at the different mouth structures across these different animal taxa. And you get an idea of these different drivers of diversity of heterotrophy. Look at the mouth parts. That's a good clue. And so you get different things like herbivores, for example. There's a number of different kinds. Pollinators or nectar eaters. So they tend to have these long tube-like structures. So look at this butterfly. That is basically a straw that enables them to get deep down and suck out the nectar from plants. And obviously you're going from plant to plant, so they're also pollinating at the same time. Herbivores can also be plant predators, so like leafcutter ants, which there's a whole field of leafcutter ants, as it turns out. One of the people that is on my guidance committee and PhD is an expert on the muscle physiology of leafcutter ants, and I'm kind of learning a little bit about the research she does. But they're plant predators, obviously. They have specifically designed mandibles to cut into the tissues of plants and carry the plants in specific ways. Fruit eaters, obviously, they don't kill the plants. They don't predate on them, but they eat the freely given things from plants for their benefit. And then things like grazers, ruminants, which eat grasses. And I just wanted to talk really briefly about ruminant digestion physiology because it's really cool and kind of gross, but coolly gross. So here's a cow, obviously. A cow is eating grass, and that cow swallows a bunch of grass, and it goes down into a series of 4 stomachs, which is pretty cool. So from the rumen to the reticulum, the omasum, and the obomasum. Why do things like ruminants, so cows, deer, elk, sheep, things that eat grass, grazers, why do they have 4 stomachs? This kind of seems excessive, right? The reason why is that they're eating grass, which has an extremely high cellulose content. Remember, cellulose is a long polymer, polysaccharide, that is really hard, actually, it turns out, to break down enzymatically in our stomachs. So if you eat grass, for example, you're going to puke because our stomachs, human beings' stomachs, are not designed to be able to break down really heavy cellulose. It's just too much. Dogs, maybe you've had a dog in the past that, have you ever noticed some dogs like to eat grass? No one really knows why they do this, but they'll eat grass and then they'll puke it up and then they eat it again. That's a whole other thing. So it's really hard to break down and digest grass. So things like ruminants, which do have the ability to eat grass and digest it, they eat the grass. It goes into stomach number 1, the rumen, and it digests a little bit, and then grossly they throw it back up again. It comes back up into their stomach or up through their esophagus and back into their mouth, and they chew it again, and then they swallow it again, and then it goes into stomach number 2, the reticulum. It digests a little more. They throw it up again, and then it comes and they chew it again and back into the omasum and again all the way through, finally till it reaches the digestion, the intestinal tract. And so it's kind of just that slow process of breaking it down. So you always think of cows as kind of just sitting there kind of chewing. Why are cows always chewing even if they didn't just take a bite of grass? The answer is that they are probably chewing their own throw up. Isn't that cool and gross? Carnivores, relatively speaking, have very simple digestive tracts. It's one way in, one way out, because they're eating things that are very much like themselves. They're eating other animals, and so their digestive tracts are only concerned with breaking down, for the most part, fats and proteins, and it's relatively easy for our digestion tract to break down those types of biological molecules. Omnivores like us, for example, are a little bit of both. We cannot eat grass, but we do eat a lot of other fruits. Our closest living relative, chimpanzees, eat them. Eat plants as well as animals. They're even cannibalistic sometimes. And then black bears. We often think of black bears as being carnivorous, but it turns out most of their diet is actually or they're mostly herbaceous, and they'll occasionally eat meat when it's available. But a lot of the black bear diet is things like berries. And so if you look at black bear poop, you can very much get a sense that they tend to eat a lot of berries and things like that, and sometimes animals, but for the most part berries. It makes them omnivores though. So we looked at getting and digesting food really briefly. Secondly, let's look at maintaining thermal balance. That's another important life history strategy that animals have to be able to do. So things like homeostasis, which is maintaining a similar range of body temperature. That's how some organisms, like us, we have to maintain a similar body temperature. But there are a lot of organisms that do not subscribe to this method of body temperature, like things like endotherms and ectotherms and heterotherms that have wildly variable body temperatures depending on the circumstances that they find themselves in. So look at this graph. Bobcat, for example, which is a homeotherm like us, it's a mammal. It has a very consistent body temperature, whereas a snake, which is an ectotherm, it has body temperature that varies wildly with the environment. And that's for a variety of physiological reasons, which we don't have time to go into. I just think it's fun to kind of go through some of these examples of different strategies that organisms have evolved to deal with temperature in their bodies. Birds are endotherms. So these are organisms that do maintain internal body heat, but in a kind of in a weird way. They're a little bit different from mammals, which do have mammals and marsupials, which do have a very consistent body temperature. And then there's a weird group called monotremes, which is the platypus, which I won't go into any detail in because they're just really weird. They're the only poisonous mammal, I'll just say that. They lay eggs even. Ectotherms are things that do not have consistent body temperature, and so their body temperature is very much dependent on the environment. So things like fish and amphibia, reptiles, insects, they are very much tied to you'll probably, if you do the Tohon Species Extra Credit Report and you are doing your report on an amphibian or a reptile or an insect, you'll probably, there's a lot of studies on thermoregulation of ectotherms. So I'll leave that to you to investigate, and ectothermy is pretty interesting at the organismal level. Heterothermy are organisms that do have the ability to maintain internal body heat, but again, really wildly, just heavily variable. Bats, which are actually mammals, are heterotherms. Hummingbirds, oh my goodness, hummingbird physiology is really weird. Bees are another example. And then finally, I just want to point, I'm almost done here. I want to point out this really, I think this is my last slide. This really cool clade of animals called the tardigrada, which are also known as water bears. These are like the ultimate extremophiles. So these are, microscopic animals. This is what they look like under an electron micrograph, and they actually quite terrifying looking. If you here's a colorized photo of what they look like. They look kind of terrifying. You wouldn't want to encounter one that's our size, but they are the most extreme tolerating organisms of anything in the world. They even beat plants. For example, in 2007, the European Space Agency took some tardigrada in a little vial out to space in the International Space Station. And they injected that open vial and exposed it to the vacuum of space for 10 days. And when they returned it to the inside of the International Space Station and exposed it to water, they woke up and were doing just fine, despite the temperature and the the utter lack of pressure, the complete vacuum, the solar radiation. They were still fine. It's they're amazing. They've completely desiccated. They can do this weird thing called cryptobiosis, where they completely desiccate their bodies, and they can be that way for hundreds of years, it's thought. And if they just get a little bit of water, they can wake back up. So I thought this slide was kind of fun. Tardigrades in space a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. Captain, they're charging weapons. Wonder a kit and we'll be toast. What do we do? Cryptobiosis. I think that's funny. But honestly, I can't remember what the punchline was. If this were in front of the class, I think it'd be a little bit funnier. But anyway, that is all I wanted to go into, everyone, for finishing off on plants and the level of detail that I wanted to go into for animals. Obviously, I could have done a lot more detail than that, but I'm sparing you. If any of this was interesting to you, feel free to strike up a conversation with me or any other biologist and we'll talk your ear off. With that said, keep an eye to what the semester is going to be looking like, and please do not hesitate to reach out if you have any questions or concerns. All right, everyone, have a good one and take care.